There is a Bible verse that has been repeated for centuries to people who were distressed. It has been written on mugs, on pillows, in midnight messages sent by friends who wanted to help and didn't know what to say. However, for many that verse doesn't seem to work. Not because it's false, not because God has forgotten, not because the promise has lost its power, but because almost no one explained what Paul meant when he wrote those words from a prison in Rome. It is often heard as a cold command. Do not be anxious. And if you have ever truly known anxiety, you know how painful that can sound. Because if it were enough to just decide to stop worrying, you would have done it already. If repeating a phrase were enough, there wouldn't be so many people awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling with a tight chest and a mind trapped in the same question. What will happen if everything goes wrong? Before talking about peace, we must understand the problem. Anxiety is not just fear. Deep down, it is the mind trying to solve something that cannot yet be solved. There is an uncertainty before you, a relationship you don't know will last, a diagnosis that hasn't arrived yet, a debt, a child pulling away, a call that doesn't come, a pending conversation. Then your mind starts calculating. If this happens, I will do that. If I lose this, how will I live? If the news is bad, how will I go on? But the calculations never end, because the future never becomes secure enough to calm the part of you that needs certainty. And that is where the cycle begins. You think, you review, you imagine, you go back, you go forward. You try to prepare for all possible scenarios, but the more you try to control tomorrow, the more exhausted you arrive at the present. Does this sound familiar? Maybe during the day you seem to be fine. You work, you talk, you smile, you fulfill your obligations to everyone. But the silence comes, the house goes dark, the bed seems enormous, and that thought you had managed to keep away comes back to sit right in the middle of your chest. Anxiety forces you to live inside a possibility that may never happen. It makes you pay today for a pain that might not exist tomorrow. That is why Philippians 4, 6, and 7 should not be read as an accusation against those who suffer. Paul is not writing from comfort. He writes from chains, uncertainty, and threat. And yet he speaks of a peace capable of entering a cell. Not a decorative peace, but a peace that guards the heart when the storm continues. The question is this: what are you trying to solve with your mind that you can only surrender to God? Perhaps the problem is not that you haven't sought peace, but that no one taught you what to do with fear when it comes. Paul doesn't say to fake calmness. He shows you where to place that burden, with a name, with tears, and with honesty. That is where the path to the peace of God begins. Let me tell you Elena's story. Elena had been a Christian for over 20 years. She knew the Bible, attended church, led a small group on Wednesday nights, and prayed every morning before starting her day. From the outside, many would have said she was a strong, stable woman, mature in her faith. But inside her, there was a battle that almost no one saw. The anxiety was so intense that some days she couldn't leave the house. It wasn't because she didn't love God. It wasn't because she didn't believe enough. It wasn't because she hadn't tried to fight. She had read the right passages, listened to sermons, asked for prayer, and repeated biblical promises in a low voice until she had no strength left. And yet when anxiety hit, her body reacted before her words did. Her heart would race, her breathing would become shallow, her hands would shake, and an invisible sensation would tell her that something terrible was about to happen. The hardest part wasn't just the anxiety. The hardest part was what others added on top of it. Sincere but careless people would tell her, "You just have to trust God more. Pray with more faith. You shouldn't feel this way." Philippians says not to be anxious. And every phrase, although born of good intentions, fell on Elena like another stone in a backpack she could no longer carry. Because there is something deeply painful about being told to stop feeling what you don't know how to stop feeling. That doesn't produce peace, it produces shame. And shame, when placed on top of anxiety, becomes a silent prison. The person no longer just thinks, "I am afraid." Now they think, "I am afraid, and I am also failing spiritually." That is too heavy a burden. That is why we need to read Philippians 4 more carefully. Paul is not pointing a finger at the anxious. He is not saying, "If you tremble, God is disappointed in you." He is showing a way to take anxiety somewhere else. There is a huge difference between condemning fear and teaching fear where it needs to go. Elena needed to hear that. She needed to know that her anxiety did not expel her from God's love. She needed to know that she could come before Him without covering up her inner state, without faking a stronger faith than she felt, without speaking as if everything were fine when she was broken inside. Maybe you need to hear the same thing too. How many times have you hidden your anxiety because you thought a strong believer shouldn't feel that way? How many times have you smiled while inside you were crying out for help? God does not ask you to fake serenity. He invites you to bring Him the complete truth of your heart. And there, right there, is where healing begins. Because the peace of God does not begin when you deny your weakness, but when you stop hiding it. True faith is not about never feeling fear. It is about knowing who to turn to when fear truly seems stronger than you. Now let's read the passage calmly, because the mistake many people make is stopping too soon. Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God." Most people only hear the first part, "Do not be anxious." Then they feel that the Bible is demanding something impossible from them, as if anxiety were a switch that could be turned off instantly. But Paul is not simply saying, "Stop feeling." That reading is too shallow and too cruel. Paul knows suffering. He has been beaten, abandoned, persecuted, imprisoned. He writes these words from a prison, not from a comfortable life. That is why he doesn't speak like someone looking at pain from afar. He speaks like someone who has walked through anguish and discovered a path to peace. The key is in the word "but." Do not be anxious about anything, but that "but" changes everything. Paul doesn't say to repress anxiety or to hide it or to pretend to be calm. He says to do something with it. He says that the energy your mind uses to spin in circles must be taken to God in the form of concrete prayer. Anxiety wants to lock you inside your own head. It wants you to repeat scenarios, imagine losses, calculate dangers, and seek an absolute security that the future cannot give you. Paul proposes a different move, taking that weight out of your mind and presenting it before God. Not in a general way, not with pretty phrases, but with a real request. Lord, this is what scares me. This is what I cannot control. This is what I don't know how to bear. Notice that Paul says in every situation, not just in huge crises, not just when life completely falls apart, also in the small things, in the repetitive things, in what you are ashamed to mention. Anxiety doesn't always come dressed as a tragedy. Sometimes it appears in an unanswered message, in a meeting tomorrow, in a pending bill, in a phrase you said weeks ago, and keep replaying. Paul includes all of that. Nothing is too small to be brought to God if it is big enough to steal your peace. And here is the map: prayer, petition, request. Prayer places you before God. Petition allows your need to be honest. The request puts a name to the fear. This is not spiritual escapism. It is a way to stop ruminating in silence and start talking to the one who can hold what you cannot solve. So the question is direct. What anxiety do you keep repeating in your mind, but have not yet presented by name before God? Maybe you don't need to think more. Maybe you need to surrender better with the humility of someone who recognizes that peace is not born from absolute control, but from trusting God when control ends and the heart can take no more. There are two words hidden in Paul's instruction that completely change the way we understand this passage: with thanksgiving. Paul doesn't simply say to pray. He doesn't say to come to God in pure desperation, pounding on the doors of heaven as if you had to convince Him to look at you. He says to present your request with thanksgiving, and that is where many people stop in confusion. How can you give thanks when everything seems to be breaking? How can you be thankful when the diagnosis is scary? When the marriage grows cold? When the child doesn't return? When the money isn't enough? When the night seems longer than the strength you have left? Paul is not asking you to manufacture a fake emotion. He is not telling you to smile while you are falling apart inside. Biblical gratitude is not denying the pain. It is remembering who God is while the pain is still present. Giving thanks in this context means coming before God with your problem, but also with your history. It means saying, Lord, I am afraid, I don't understand, I am tired, but I remember that you didn't abandon me before. I remember there were days when I thought I wouldn't make it, and somehow you sustained me. I remember provisions I didn't expect, strength I didn't have, doors that opened when I no longer saw a way out. That doesn't automatically eliminate anxiety, but it places it within a larger story. Anxiety only looks at the current problem and the imagined disaster. It shows you the storm and hides the anchor. Gratitude forces you to look at the anchor as well. It reminds you that this situation is not the first chapter of your life with God, nor will it be the last. This appears powerfully in Psalm 77. Asaph begins with a broken prayer. He cries out to God, seeks the Lord during the night, stretches out his hands tirelessly, and confesses that his soul refuses to be comforted. He doesn't seem like a calm man. He seems like someone trapped in anguish. But then something changes. He begins to remember. He says he will remember the deeds of the Lord, that he will meditate on his ancient wonders, that he will consider his mighty acts. Asaph does not deny his pain. He doesn't pretend to be okay. What he does is introduce a truth greater than his fear. He interrupts the cycle of anxiety with spiritual memory. He preaches to himself what his emotions have forgotten. That is what Paul means by gratitude. It is not manufactured happiness. It is deliberate remembrance. It is looking back in order to breathe in the present. It is saying, God, this is beyond me, but you have not changed. And perhaps that is the question you need to ask yourself today. What has God done in your life before that your anxiety is trying to make you forget right now? Because anxiety always tries to erase the evidence of past faithfulness and present the current fear as if it were the only truth. But gratitude opens the archives of the soul and shows you once again that you didn't get here alone ever, nor will you be alone tomorrow either. Now we come to the promise that makes the entire passage breathe with extraordinary power. Paul says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Observe carefully what he does not promise. He doesn't say the problem will disappear instantly. He doesn't say the call will come with good news. He doesn't say the illness will go away, that the debt will pay itself, that the person who left will return tomorrow. He promises something different and sometimes deeper, a peace that guards. The word guard has a military sense. It is the image of soldiers stationed at the entrance of a city to watch over its gates. Paul is saying that the peace of God stands as a guard around your inner life. It doesn't necessarily prevent a storm from existing outside, but it prevents panic from taking absolute control of your heart. That is what a peace that transcends all understanding means. It is not a peace you can always explain. It is not the logical peace that appears only when everything is resolved. It is that strange calm that arrives when circumstances remain the same, but something inside you stops falling. The problem continues, the uncertainty is still there, but suddenly you can breathe. Not because you have all the answers, but because you are no longer alone inside the question. Think of James, a surgeon accustomed to control, to precision, to knowing exactly what needed to be done. His professional life depended on clear decisions. But when his youngest son received a serious diagnosis, James discovered a pain he could not operate on, research or solve with discipline. Anxiety settled in his chest like an uninvited guest. One day he spoke with his pastor, perhaps expecting a quick phrase, but the pastor asked him a different question. Can you remember a single time in your life when you were convinced that God had abandoned you, and in the end, that turned out to be true? James remained silent. He thought of losses, crises, hard nights, moments when he felt God was far away. But looking back, he couldn't find a single season where he had truly been alone. There had always been some grace, some help, some presence recognized afterward. That conversation didn't cure his son immediately. The road continued to be difficult, but it changed James's posture. He stopped trying to see the whole road and started walking one day at a time, looking to the God who saw further than he did. That is the peace that guards. It doesn't always change the situation first. Sometimes it changes the place from which you face it. And maybe that is the question for you. Do you need God to explain everything to you, or do you need His peace to guard the door of your heart as you move forward today? Because when that door is guarded, fear may knock, but it no longer rules the entire house of your soul. nor does it decide your next step this very day. Now let's put all this into practice, because a truth that does not become a prayer can remain far from the heart. Paul does not give us a phrase to decorate anxiety. He gives us a way to get through it. When fear returns, when the night grows heavy, when that thought appears again, do not start arguing with it for hours. Start by praying with the structure that the passage itself shows us. First, remember, before asking for anything, name 3 things you know about God. Not 3 things you feel strongly in that moment, but 3 truths that remain even if your emotions tremble. He has been faithful. He did not abandon you before. He can see further than you. This gratitude does not deny the wound. It places the wound before a God who already has a history with you. Next, name the fear. Don't just say, "Lord, I am anxious." Be specific. Say, "Lord, I am afraid of losing this. I am afraid this call will bring bad news. I am afraid I won't be able to support my family. I am afraid my child won't come back. I am afraid of ending up alone." Anxiety grows in the darkness of the unspoken. When you bring it to God with clear words, something begins to step out of the shadows. Then surrender the outcome. This is the hardest part, because your mind will want to take back control immediately. But you can say, "God, I don't know how this will be resolved. I don't know what you are doing. I can't see the whole path. But I trust that you see what I do not see. I leave this in your hands." And then stay there. Don't immediately go back to calculating everything. Make room for peace. Perhaps that peace won't come like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it arrives slowly, like breathing returning to its normal rhythm. The problem remains, but you no longer carry it alone. The storm continues, but you discover that Christ is in the boat. Before calming the sea, he was already there with his disciples. And before changing your circumstances, he is also with you. Anxiety will tell you a story. It will tell you that the worst outcome is inevitable, that you won't be able to bear it, that God is far away, or that your fear is the greatest truth of your life. But that story does not have the final word. Philippians teaches us another story. Bring your burden, remember who God is, name your fear, surrender what you cannot control, and let the peace of God guard the door of your heart. You are not too anxious for this promise. Your situation is not too complicated. Your fear is not too great. If the peace of God reached Paul in a prison, it can also reach you in your night. Today, before going to sleep, perhaps you can pray that simple prayer and discover that God's presence is still enough for you. Start there. Bring it all to him, and let his peace do what it promises to do. Guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus.